A very warm good evening to all of you. On behalf of Learning Point, we welcome you to this short Clat orientation session. As you all know, the Clat is a national level exam. Obviously, too, there's a UG portion and a PG exam as well. We're going to be dealing majorly with the Clat UG as of now. And what does a Clat do? Gives you entrance into the premier national law universities across the country, which is 22, which we'll be naming at the end of the session, the introductory session. Of course, as you all know, it's been organized by the consortium of the NLUs. And there's only one important thing that I want to mention as far as, eligibility and your various other preliminary things about Clat is concerned, which all of the information is available online and it would seem a little redundant. So one of the most important things is the fact that looking at the current situation, the board exams as such, you would have to have a 45% minimum equivalent marks, right? 45% of marks in your board exams for all categories. And if it's a scheduled caste and scheduled tribe category, it's 40% of marks. That will be a eligibility requirement for you to take the Clat exam. That's what we have here, which is the 45% marks and the 40% marks, right? So until 2019, there was a certain set pattern that was going on with Clat, right? For example, your quantitative techniques was called elementary mathematics, and there was a lot of math really into it for class 10, which is and direct problems and objective solving, which a lot of students found difficult. This year, it's moved on to something called quantitative techniques, and when you look at the differences, although they might seem incremental in some parts of it, it's also quite quite a step forward when you're looking at the other sections. So I just want to give you a brief outline of what is it that has changed from your 2019 to 2020, and therefore, of course, is going to be carried on to your 2021 Clat exam as well, the one that all of you aspirants are going to be taking. And these words that are on this slide are basically just the exact words that have been picked out of the consortium of NLUs, because I wanted you to actually look at the text that they're offering, as part of their notification, and also what are they saying? Because the only real, veritable, valuable piece of information about any exam, that competitive exam that you can get, is actually what the recruiting agency or a consortium, is telling you. Because when you go and Google, there's a lot of information available, but it makes sense for you to go to the source, the actual source of information of who is really conducting the exam. So these are the wordings that they have used. So I've highlighted a few of it that is of significance. So they say that the Clat would focus on evaluating the comprehension and reasoning skills and abilities, right? So why have they added this now? The comprehension and reasoning skills and abilities. And they say it will be a test of aptitude and skills. Again, the word skills is repeated. So what are they trying to say? Comprehension and reasoning skills, aptitude and skills. And they say these are things that they would expect of an aspirant who is wanting to get into, right, legal education. And they don't really want you to have real prior knowledge. That's what they say, rather than prior knowledge. What is necessary for legal education rather than prior knowledge, which means you really need not go and sit and study, what first year law students are going to be studying. That's what they mean, because they understand that in class 11 and 12, obviously you are not going to have that exposure. And it's an important shift away is how we see it. It's a 2-hour test. And of course, there'll be 150 multiple choice questions. And of course, 1 mark each. So 150 marks and 0.25 marks, which will be the very important negative marking, right? And why negative marking is important here is because I will also be telling you just a little bit about exam room strategy when we're looking at exams. It's not just about studying, but also really what you do inside the exam hall. We'll get to that in a bit. So these are the 5 different divisions. What they give us, one is English language, current affairs and general knowledge, legal reasoning, logical reasoning, and quantitative techniques. So we'll take a look of what each one of these are. So as you can see, English language. So what I've mentioned here is actually the 30Q. What it means is last year's, which is Clat 2020, had about, out of the 150, there were 30 questions on English language. And if you take a look at the question paper, they've actually gone a little bit ahead to, make it takes you about 5 to 7 minutes to read a passage, right? So you really need to practice and be quick with reading, understanding, grasping, and figuring out what really the question is and what you're expected to choose. So again, I put out text that was given out by the consortium. Let's take a look at this. So each passage, like they said, would be about 450 words each, right? And I think one of the things that we, at the outset, I want to mention is any queries that you have, or, you want me to stop anywhere, and just whatever else that you require, do kindly post across in the chat. I think it's visible to me as well. I'll be able to respond to that. So they're saying, where will these passages be from? Contemporary or historically significant fiction and non-fiction. So what is the significance of these words, right? Contemporary or historically significant fiction and non-fiction writing. So what they're basically telling you is it's not only essential or enough if you only read your textbooks or guidebooks or whatever is there in Clat, but do read extensively, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, do read. That's the cue that we really have to take from what they're saying in this sentence. Of course, they're saying the standard would be over 12 standard, right? And as you all know, with English comprehension, when there's a passage, there's going to be a bunch of questions after the passage, right? And there's a whole bunch of different things here. So they say the main, here again, I've highlighted. So you need to read and comprehend the main point or main idea in that passage, as they've put it out here, and as well as the various arguments and viewpoints discussed or set out in the passage. They say draw inferences and conclusions, summarize, compare, contrast the different arguments and viewpoints. So what are all these things? So what is the difference between an argument, right? What is the difference between an argument, an inference, a conclusion, summarizing, understanding what the main idea is, right? What is the difference between assumptions and inferences and conclusions? So all of these things are nuances that will be considered and will be taught to you as you go across the course, taking a Clat course as part of the English module of it, right? Of one of the 5 modules. So basically, at the end of it, it's going to be passages and questions, nothing else as far as your English module of the Clat exam is concerned. Next, we move on to our current affairs, including general knowledge. Previously, it used to be that we'll sit and study a bit of history, a bit of geography, economics, polity, and then a bit of constitution, trying to understand at least the fundamental rights and fundamental duties, and maybe, emergency and the various important articles, maybe Article 32, which is quite up for discussion right now with the Supreme Court's handling of cases. But so important constitutional provisions. So these are all things that we pick out, choose, and basically take a textbook and study all of these things, right? So now the approach has completely changed, because previously our questions were very straightforward. For a current affairs question, for example, if there were questions that they wanted you not to answer, they'd probably end up saying, name the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of South Africa. I mean, obviously, we're not going to think about the Supreme Court of South Africa, let alone the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of South Africa. So a few obnoxious questions like that, simply to make sure that you aren't able to answer every single question, right? That used to be it. But what have they done now? They've gone ahead and brought in passages for your current affairs as well. So even your current affairs part of it has passages. Again, the same thing. Passages of up to 450 words each. And where will they be from? They will be from news, journalistic sources, your magazines, largely from your mainstream newspapers, but also sometimes a few of these in the last year's paper, which is Clat 2020, some of the questions were actually direct excerpts from some of the judgments or some of the court deliberations, and also reports from jurisprudence abroad. So it's been a very diverse thing. You can't really point to one source and really prepare from that. Again, how passages and questions go. Each passage will be followed by a series of questions again that will require you, like I said, the bolded part of it, your awareness on various aspects of current affairs and general knowledge. So basically, what the consortium is trying to tell us here is awareness of various aspects of current affairs and general knowledge. What they're basically trying to tell us is you're not going to be able to crack the exam if you're going to take one guide and study it. You know, January current affairs, February current affairs. That's how our guides and books are out there, right? You are not going to be able to answer effectively questions because what happens when a passage, so basically what they're going to do is they're going to pull an article out of the Hindu or the Times of India or the Indian Express. So put that article out and edit an editorial essentially and ask you a few questions from that. So suppose you've never heard about that, right? For example, the US election, the current US presidential election for the 47th president, right? If you had completely clueless about it, then the assumptions that the writer is making in that column, for example, the electoral system of the elections, the unique way that a president in the US is elected, unless you're aware of that election process, the assumptions that the writer is making in the passage, and if there are questions from those assumptions, you are not going to be able to answer that, right? So therefore, what happens when a US election is coming about, or when a prime ministerial election, or rather a parliamentary election, beg your pardon, it's not a prime ministerial election in India, it's a parliamentary election. When a parliamentary election comes about, obviously you can't be, ignorant of the entire process of elections. So that's what they mean here on awareness of various aspects of current affairs. When an issue is happening, for example, COVID-19, right? You must know everything about COVID-19. What are the vaccines? Who's working on what vaccines? And not just the factual aspects of it. What is it? What is an mRNA vaccine? Because an mRNA vaccine is something that's been tried out for the first time in the world, because usually it's attenuated viruses or inactivated viruses when vaccines go. So the mRNA vaccine is a peculiar concept and an important one, a potential question for you for next year. So that's what they mean here, right? Again, emphasis on read newspapers, right? And what are they saying? They're giving you a little bit of specificity here. They're saying contemporary events of significance from India and the world, right? Arts and culture, international affairs, historical events of continuing significance. A few examples, the wars that are going on currently, the geopolitics, the tussle, the Cold Wars, all of those things are historical events that are of continuing significance, just to give you an example. So current affairs as such has to be looked at from a very different lens right now, because they're brought in the aspect of passages and questions from it, right? We move on to legal reasoning. I'm just going to be very short on legal reasoning because Mr. Parthiban is going to elaborate a little bit on it. Again, look at that. Look at that. Passages of around 450 words each. Again. So the importance of reading, I think that's what it shows us, the importance of reading, that we have to continuously keep reading. So if you haven't picked up a newspaper yet, today is a good day to start, right? And again, they mention here, consortium says, you will not require any prior knowledge of law. But of course, they expect a general awareness of contemporary legal and moral issues. Like I said, one of the things was Article 32. And again, the passage being followed by a series of questions. So you would be required to identify rules and principles, right? Analyze what legal principles are being used. And also, there might, the question might be on when there's a passage and there's a certain legal precedent that's explained in the passage, they might go on to ask you how it can apply in a different situation, right? That's a possible question. So basically, your legal reasoning also has drastically shifted. And I think Mr. Parthiban will throw great light on that today when he's having your initial discussion date today. Moving on to logical reasoning. And as I said, see, what we've done here is, I said that the first English had about 30 questions, right? And then we have about 36 questions with current affairs, 39 with legal reasoning. And as we move on, logical reasoning It's about 30 questions. That's what we had in Clat 2020. So logical reasoning again has undergone a great shift. What has happened? Logical reasoning, previously we had about 20 topics. I think last week's session, faculty had informed of that there'll be a whole bunch of topics and chapters. Of course, you still have to do that, because see, nowhere are they saying, as part of the notification, as part of whatever is available on the website, that we will not go ahead and ask you certain things. So we are going to assume that, whatever we are planning, let's say about 15 different topics in logical reasoning, we still have to prepare for that. Because if you look at this year, there are a few topics that are not there, but you can't really, discount them for next year when you're preparing, because they might turn up. So the keywords here are class 10 level and class 12 level. Class 10 and class 12 level, which is what is mentioned a couple of times in whatever information that they're giving us. Again, here, what do we have? Coming back to passages, right? Again, even with logical reasoning, you're going to have passages, and again, followed by questions. And here, it's going to be a little bit more analytical than what you have, because you might ask, then what really is the difference between English comprehension or the English module and the logical reasoning module, right? So there is a subtle difference. With English module, the questions are not going to be as analytical as with your logical reasoning. Because with logical reasoning, what's going to happen is they're going to go ahead and ask you each passage, of course, following it. You have to pull out the argument and kind of try and understand, and then make give an answer, rather, out of the choices that are given, as to what you think the argument and the patterns of reasoning, that's what we've highlighted, right? Patterns of reasoning, what it is. So whatever reasoning is there as part of the passage, there might be patterns to it. So you're expected to, one, identify the patterns, and then analyze the patterns, and also be very shrewd in picking them out quickly. Because what they've tried to do here essentially is, when they throw about roughly about 30-40 passages out onto you, it's quite intimidating initially, right, when you're looking at it, because you see that there's a lengthy paper that you have to read through, and you have to read through a passage every time to try and pull out the question and pull out the answer, rather. So there are few strategies to do that. One, before reading the passage, with English especially, before reading the passage, you can actually read the questions and then also read the passage. Do it simultaneously. You'll be taught all that as we go across our course. But logical reasoning, again, is going to, and the other important word here is critically analyze. I think all of our students are going to be part of the course. I urge you to go and try and find the difference between critically analyze and analyze, right? Because there has to be reason, and there definitely has to be a difference between critically analyze and analyze. Do try and look that up. And like we discussed, inferring what follows from the passage, and similar to what we had in our legal reasoning, applying these inferences to newer situations, right? That's what is going to be part of logical reasoning, just to put it shortly. So basically, if you look at last year's question paper, you'll understand that apart from, asking you what the main idea of the passage is, they'll also try to understand assertions, statements and assumptions that will be asked as part of the questions. When your class starts tomorrow, I think you'll get a lot of clarity, because one of the things that we're going to do, now that I've just set out the kind of agenda as to what really is required as part of each module, starting off tomorrow especially with logical reasoning and quantitative techniques, what we're going to do, or what we propose to do, is take a look at the previous questions, basically Clat 2020. Let's start off with that, because it's a good yardstick, simply because you can't use the last 5 years, because any competitive exam, what happens, you basically look at the last 5 years question papers, right? But here, what happens is you can't really do that, because you only have 1 year's question paper available, which was Clat 2020. So so as part of logical reasoning and quantitative techniques, specifically what we'll do is we'll pick out those questions of Clat 2020 try and analyze them and understand, we'll set the ground kind of tomorrow when we have the classes. That's what we'll do as part of our logical reasoning session and quantitative techniques session. Moving on to quantitative techniques, it's about 15 questions, but don't underestimate it, because quantitative techniques is one of those things where you can be really sure of the answer. See, the problem with English and the problem with logical reasoning is there's a possibility of the question being extremely confusing, one, and 2 or 3 options really seeming like the right answer. So it's really a challenge. And it, of course, it's something. It's a skill that you can acquire when you're continuously practicing this for for 4, 5, 6 months. It's definitely a skill that you can acquire, but it's a challenge. But with quantitative techniques, what happens is, again, they've moved away from direct, straightforward questions. What they've done, they've gone over to what we generally call as part of quantitative aptitude, we call as paragraph questions, which can also be called, right, graph questions. It can also be called as graph questions, textual, pictorial, diagrammatic questions, and sometimes numerical information, right, representations. Again, so what happened in Clat 2020 was it was 3 different sets. One was a bar graph, another was a diagram, and another was just an aggregation of data. And out of these 3 separate dimensions, what were given, there were 5 questions each that were under these. So basically, if you understood the graph or the bar graph or the pie chart or whatever it is, if you understood it and if you solved a few, it's very easy to solve the remaining questions, right? Because it won't be that difficult, because again, as they say here, is what I mentioned, 10th standard mathematical operations. So of course, most of you who will be taking the Clat would have opted out of mathematics in class 11 and 12. So, it's solace for you because it's not going to be very high grade mathematics at all, right? When you keep in touch over it, it's going to be fairly easy. And like they say here, information will have to be. So it's about deriving information. So basically, what are they asking you to do? You must be able to read information from passages, read information from graphs. So let me get that back. Read information from graphs and any other representation. All right. So they've just given us some basic information here. What they've said 10 standard level of mathematics, but of course, they only say including, right? They don't give you the entire syllabi, rather. So they're saying including from areas such as ratios and proportions, basic algebra, mensuration, and statistical estimation. But of course, probability, obviously, probability is something that usually comes up. So there are roughly about 15 different topics that we have to cover as far as quantitative techniques is concerned. But the reason why I say don't ignore quantitative techniques thinking that it's mathematics is because if you are well prepared, you get all those 15 questions right. And you can be sure of it, one. And the next one is, it takes you much lesser time than analyzing in logical reasoning, or really, squeezing your brain with legal reasoning, or really quick reading and comprehension as with English. So quantitative techniques might seem a little difficult, but it really isn't. And therefore, I urge you to really, from the beginning, don't have the mindset of thinking, oh, it's only 15 questions of maths. It's not maths, right? There's a reason why they've changed the name from elementary maths to quantitative techniques, because they don't want you to just sit and come and do a problem, right? Said man went and bought said product, sold it to, X bought said product and sold it to Y for this price and this price. What is the profit or what is the loss? They're not going to be asking questions like that, because they're moving away from, purely objective and purely factual to something that's a little more analytical as an entire paper as such. All right. So this is about what really the various modules of the paper is. We'll just move on quickly, just to give you an idea. Let's give you a very brief idea about Clat. Yes, of course, we know that it's the 22 NLUs. Let's just take a look at what those are. So the participating universities for Clat 2021, As you know, the national law schools, I'm just going to refer to them as national law schools because each one, they have their own names. Like, it's NLSIU in Bangalore, whereas it's NALSA in Hyderabad. So let's just look at, I'm just going to mention the city names for you. This is just for you to look at it. So it's at Bangalore, Calcutta, Hyderabad, Bhopal, Raipur and Gandhinagar, Lucknow and Punjab. It's a total of 22. Kochi and Trichy. Of course, Trichy is one, and I think NLSIU Bangalore is also, it's one of the, it's the top. So that and then NLU Trichy is something that would pique the interest of most of our students, I presume. Odisha and Ranchi, Assam, Mumbai, Nagpur, Aurangabad, and here we go ahead back into Jodhpur, Patna, Vishakhapatnam, Jabalpur, Haryana, and Shimla. So that's a total of 22 national law universities. Excuse me. Apart from this, it's not just these 22, right? About 62 private universities across the country have signed an MOU with the consortium of NLU to use the Clat scores as a modicum of entrance into their own universities, right? So I've just outlined some of the, I put up the link there. You can go ahead and see what are all those universities. But apart from that, I've just mentioned a few that might be of interest to us, especially from the south. One is Amity, ISBR Bangalore. Manipal, of course, is very popular. Presidency Bangalore, SRM, as we know, in Chennai and a few other places in the north. We have VIT and we have Narsi Monji as well, NMIMS, which is also popular in Maharashtra. It's there in Bombay and in Bangalore as well. Some of the ones that are in the south, which might be of interest for you guys, right? So let's just move on to, I just want to give some basic tips and then we'll quickly jump into legal reasoning by Mr. Parthabud. As you can see, the first thing that I would want to say is English, English, and English. As you have seen, 4 out of the 5 modules are largely on, especially your, see, for English, obviously, you need good speed of reading English, right? You need to be quick in grasping what the writer is trying to tell you because they're putting out short stories and, articles. That's one. As part of legal reasoning, again, it's passages. So you again need to be able to quickly read and grasp what the passage that's written is actually trying to tell you, correct? And then you move on and you come to logical reasoning, which again has passages. Of course, quantitative techniques, it's not really a passage, right? So English reading is going to be the bedrock of your Clat preparation. So it's going to help you, like I've said, in your English, in your legal reasoning, and of course, your current affairs as well, right? So actually in 4, I've just mentioned 3 here, yes. It's going to help in 4 parts of your preparation and the 4 modules rather. So what do you do for that? Students and friends, definitely start reading. And that's something that I've mentioned to you. Read extensively because here I've mentioned to you the Hindu, the Times of India. Down to Earth is a magazine. You can look it up. Business Today again is a daily. Economic Times is a daily. The Print is a popular website that's out there, Independent Media and the Hindustan Times. So why have I mentioned these? It does not mean that you have to read each and every one of those. Choose one first. Ideally, I would say the Hindu or the Times of India, whichever you fancy, and then slowly move on to fortnightly magazines or other things which is of interest and blogs. But first start with the newspaper because that kind of gives you a holistic idea on what's happening in the country and across the world. And why have I mentioned only these names, what I've mentioned here with read extensively, these names that I have mentioned? The reason why these are mentioned is because passages of Clat 2020 have been lifted from all of these platforms or all of these dailies and blogs and online. The print is largely present online. So these are all actual Clat 2020 paper articles that have been pulled out of all of these dailies, blogs, and magazines, right? Okay, so like I said, at the outset, one of the basic things that we want is repeated revisions. because you might be tempted to keep reading. The problem with current affairs and general knowledge, and when an exam is based on what's happening currently, largely based on what's happening in the world, the problem is it's never ending, right? When you have a textbook, there's I think I have some I see some raised hands. Let me just try and just a moment. Right. Whoever is raising your hands, please go ahead and post your queries on the chat box, because I have it open, so I'll be able to respond to whatever questions you have. Right. So repeated revisions, what I mean is, for example, quantitative techniques, right? There's only so much that's going to be asked, right? Because it's going to be class 10, 11 level. So you can always have a set text that you're going to follow. We suggest you use our text. So we have an MOU with Arihant. We've come up with a text that is fairly short and just gives you what is basically required. As far as something like quantitative techniques is concerned, obviously a text can't give you what as part of legal reasoning or your current affairs, right? When it comes to logical reasoning, and then again, yes, we can. Logical reasoning and quantitative techniques is something that can really be confined to one text. Choose whatever. We would suggest you use ours, but choose one text. Don't keep jumping from one text to the other, because that's going to be counterproductive and really will sabotage your preparation at the end, right? Because whoever's cleared, even the top rankers and whoever have gotten into the NLUs, they've all used different materials, and it's very different, the materials that each individual uses. So it's a personal choice. I mean, it's something that you can test and try and figure out what you want to spend time with. But as far as quantitative techniques and your logical reasoning is concerned, repeated revisions are of great utility, right? And the other one is own notes. What I mean by that, what I mean by own notes is especially of utility when you're looking at your current affairs preparation, your current affairs and general knowledge. Let's say you're taking the exam from about 6 months from now, right? So from today, you start noting down what are all the important things and having them available, so that even as topics, right? Because largely factual information is not being asked. It's a combination of both. We've largely shifted towards the analytical part of it. So whatever important factual information, yes, but not a lot of factual information. But if you maintain a current affairs book, right, that you write, in your own hand, at the end, before the exam, when you're revising, it will be of great utility, because at some part of our brains, we have a photographic memory. All of us have it. Some of us have it more than others. When you're actually seeing a passage and a question, what happens is you get reminded of the fact that you actually wrote this concept down in your own notebook. So just relying on textbooks and material is not going to do it if you want to be there at Bangalore or Trichy. So make sure that you start the work today. And why have I mentioned social media here? Maybe if any of you students can respond in the chat, why do you think I've mentioned social media here as one of the tip points? So I think the contention is whether you should use social media or not use it, right? And I would say stay out of it as much as you can, right? You don't need Instagram and Facebook for your news. You really don't. If you go on Google and really look at the interviews of the toppers, the top rankers of Clat 2020, I think there are a few of them that have said we quit social media and stayed out of it, because I'm sure. See, I'm not saying there's not information available on social media. Of course there is, but that information can also be obtained by directly visiting, for example, the Print or the Hindu directly, right? You don't need the social media platform. And why I mention that is because there's going to be a lot of distractions in social media. You're going to have your friends' timeline, their feeds onto you, and a lot of unwanted advertising that's trying to grab your attention. When you're on social media, there's a whole bunch of hundreds of large companies across the world who are vying for your attention. They want you to click. It's called clickbait. But when you go directly to these news houses or information houses directly, I'm not saying there's no ads at all, but I think it's way lesser than what you get on social media, for example, Instagram or Facebook. So what I mean by here, social media is a definite no, it's not a tick. All right. And I've also mentioned the read extensively. The exam hall strategy, I think it's already 5:45. So what we'll do as far as the exam hall strategy is concerned, let me just give you 2 minutes. I'll just explain that. What do I mean by exam hall strategy? See, when I talk to students, I tell them always, it doesn't matter what you do during the entire 1 year. For example, suppose let's say that you've taken 1 year to prepare for the Clat, right? The consortium of Clat that conducts the exam doesn't care what you did for 1 year, right? The question paper that comes in, and when you're sitting inside the exam hall, of course, I'm not saying you should not prepare before that. Preparation is, it's an obvious thing, right? You can't go take the exam without preparing well. Of course, we have to prepare well. That's why the whole exercise of classes and orientation and everything. But the short point is your preparation for the exam is very, very different from the actual taking of the exam, right? You might have studied and prepared with all notes, exhaustive notes, everything for an entire year. But if you did not take mock exams, if you did not really sit down in a realistic setting of how an exam will be, if you did not time yourself, because at the end of the day, it's a game of time and accuracy. There's only two things to it: time and accuracy as far as the competitive exams are concerned. Suppose I gave you 1 more hour for the 150 questions. Another 40% of students would be able to do it, right? This is something that's really underplayed in a lot of competitive exam preparation. It's a matter of time and accuracy, I repeat. So therefore, what is this exam hall strategy? Prepare the outside the exam hall, the preparation, the taking the mock tests, and all of that is one part of the story. The other part of the story is, what do you do when you go inside the exam hall and sit down there? It's called temperament. It's called character when you're taking the exam, right? Suppose you go there, you sit inside, and let's say you're looking at quantitative techniques first, because I'm telling you that it's something that you can score quickly and get into the groove of taking the exam quickly. So let's say, taking our advice, you sit down and take quantitative techniques and start working out. The first graph that you see is too complicated. You're not able to, you can't tell head or tail of it. What do you do at that instant? Oh my God, I've lost 5 questions. And then you move on to the next one, and you can't solve the next one as well. So about 50% of students who take the exam are out of the race in the first 1 hour. When they get tensed for whatever reason, they go blank. They say, oh, I prepared everything, but when I sat in the exam hall, I went blank, right? What is that point to? That points to a lack of preparation of taking the exam, not of preparation of how to take the exam, but of preparation of inside the exam hall strategy. It's about temperament. So let's say you don't know the answer to 5 questions. The first thing that you must think is, if I don't know the answer, most probably about 80% of them don't know the answer. Therefore, let me move on. I still have another 145 questions. It's about attitude and temperament, which is very, very important when you're taking an exam, because you prepare for a year and you are given just that short time, 2 hours to prove, right? The platform, the consortium, the question paper, nothing really cares what you did for the last 8 months, but what you do inside that exam hall for 2 hours. So it's almost like a celebration. You taking the exam must be a celebration. You must look forward to it because you've been preparing for it for so long. So it's an entire science, what you really do in exam hall to maintain your cool and therefore make sure you perform at your optimum level, and whatever preparation that you did comes to fruition, because it's very important that your preparation comes to fruition when you go and perform on the day, right? This is similar to practicing for 2 years in the rather 2 months in the nets before going to the World Cup match, and then going there and getting tense and getting duck out. So all your effort is wasted. Which is why sports persons that are performing at that level have a separate, coach that actually gets them through managing their emotions, right? I think our previous Captain Cool was known for that. absolute cool at the most stressful of situations. Even when we were watching the matches, we were more stressed than him on the field. So it's an important aspect which we will definitely dwell and also delve into once your classes end, your modules begin and go across, right? Any questions, students? I think we've shot over by about 10 minutes. Any specific questions you have at this point? If not, all right, we'll just move ahead, and thank you so much for being part of this initial introductory session. So what we're going to do is this session is just going to continue on, as Mr. Parthiban is just going to continue it as our first initial session of legal reasoning.